Hello and welcome to my cruise trip report for my recent journey on board the Independence of the Seas, where I did a mini cruise to Northern Europe, calling into both Hamburg and Rotterdam. Royal Caribbean were one of the lines I first looked at sailing with when me and my wife were planning our honeymoon, and whilst we chose Norwegian over them, I have always kept an eye on the line. Sadly, their prices have either been far too high, or they have just not sailed to where I wanted to go to. But just a few months before sailing in October 2025, I noticed a big sailing on a short cruise of Northern Europe, and I just couldn't help but book. They were calling to Hamburg and Rotterdam, and I have 2 days at sea. And whilst I have already been to Rotterdam, I had never visited Hamburg before, but I do enjoy trips to German cities, so this looked a great itinerary at the right price and on a ship that many had already told me that they loved. It would be the Independence of the Seas that I would cruise on, and while she is not the biggest or newest ship in the Royal Caribbean International Fleet, she has everything you associate with the line, including a climbing wall, surf rider, an ice rink and the internal promenade. So that would be the perfect journey to get an understanding of the line, and I'd love for you to join me as I take you through my getaway in this 2-part trip report. So if that sounds of interest to you, don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you have visited either of the ports mentioned or you have sailed on the Independence of the Seas, let me know about your experience in the comments below. My name is Darren, and this is my Hamburg and Rotterdam mini cruise trip report. Right from the time of booking up until a couple of days before departure, the ship was due to sail out of the city terminal at Southampton, but I received an email that we will be moving next door to the Horizon terminal. So it would be to the newest terminal at the port where we would set sail from. Thankfully, Southampton is what I class as my home port, despite being hours away from where I live, so the changes didn't make much difference as I have sailed out of both and knew what I was doing at both. Me and my wife have a routine for sailing out of the port, so we will set off the night before, stay overnight around 45 minutes from the port, and then continue on first thing in the morning. To give us a buffer, we always allow to get to Southampton around an hour early and park up at the Mayflower Park, right next to the cruise port, and that would usually give you a great view of your cruise ship, especially if you are sailing out of the city terminal or the Horizon if no ship is a city, and that was the case for us. For me, that is always when the cruise holiday really starts, as that's when you get an up close view of your ship, and I'm already pretty much at the port and I'm ready to go. From parking up to walking on board the ship, it took me and my wife only around 10 minutes, which is pretty incredible when you think about it, and once again the staff at Southampton were incredibly friendly and efficient, and it proved to be a great start to our first ever cruise with the line. My go-to first activity on the ship, especially a new one, is to take a wander around, get to know the main areas such as the Royal Promenade, and then head up to the top decks for further exploration, before heading into the buffet, and that's just what I did on Indy. I had a few hours before I could head to my stateroom, but as soon as the announcement that rooms were ready, we headed to it, had a nosy around and set off to explore some more, without our carry-on bags now. After another trip to the buffet for tea, and a quick change, it was time to head to Studio B, and to watch the ice skating show known as Freeze Frame. I have been to a few similar shows before, including the Hot Ice Show at Blackpool and Disney on Ice, and whilst it may not have quite been at those levels, it was still a great show and something that I would highly recommend. I think the biggest issue was just the size of the rink, and that limited what they could do, but the 45-minute show flew by and drew a packed crowd. After that, it was straight to bed to get ready for our first full day on board, which was a day at sea. So me and my wife started at the buffet for breakfast before heading down to the helipad, as whilst I did have the chance to sail through the Prince Christian Sound at the very front of the ship, I had never had that experience in the open sea. From there on in, It was simply a day relaxing, enjoying all that's on offer, including some table tennis and mini golf, before heading back to my room to get changed for the only formal night on this journey. I would start the evening with tea in the Windjammer, before heading down to the theatre to see the Invitation to Dance show, a production show that focused more on dancing than singing, although the ship singers were involved. Most lines do similar shows, and if you have cruised before, the chances are that you will know how much of the show goes. And to be honest, it's kind of a quintessential cruise show, and that is because it just works, and this one was no different, with a quality performance from all involved. The theatre is just how I personally like them to be, as it has a traditional theatre setup with multiple levels, unlike some ships that have a more auditorium feel to them, or worst of all, the NCL Prima, that had a multi-purpose room that really wasn't fit for any purpose. One big plus, and one thing that I should give huge credit to Royal Caribbean for, is that the ship still had an orchestra on it to play live music for the shows on board. It really does make such a difference to the experience for me and my wife personally, and it is something that would tip us towards cruising with a line that offered it over one that has removed them to save money, such as NCL.
Going ashore with Darren.
So the next day would see us wake up in the German city of Hamburg, as we had an early arrival and missed a sail down the River Elbe, although it would have been in darkness anyway. With a choice of cruise terminals in Hamburg, including ones within easy walking distance of the city, we would dock at the Steinwerder terminal, which is the furthest away, and about a 75-minute walk or so from the city, or a 45-minute shuttle. We would take the shuttle option, which cost $25 each, and you needed to book a time for the first leg, although buses from the city to the ship worked as a usual shuttle, and you just got on the first one that you wanted to get back. I had booked for the time slot of 8:30 in the morning, but after an early breakfast and seeing we had docked earlier than scheduled, we went down to deck 4 and people were already walking off the ship, so me and my wife joined them. We got straight onto a shuttle coach, and after a short wait until we filled up, we set off into the city around 15 minutes early. The drop-off was Bus Park Platz, close to the warehouse district, and thankfully I had done some research and knew where we would be getting dropped off for our day of exploration. Aside from an Italian couple on the same coach, nobody else had obviously done any research, as they all just stood there looking a bit confused and bewildered. With only a short period of time on shore when cruising, I always like to do at least a basic walking route around the destination, which just saves wasting time, but we still do wander off it and look at anything we come across that looks interesting. In Hamburg, we would first cross the road and head down the Deichstraße, which is an interesting street in its own right, but it does open up onto a floating pontoon via a couple of small ginnels, or alleys if you're not from my neck of the woods.
If they thinks about a space, you've got one between the houses, between that house and neighbour's house, and there's got a little route down the middle of it. What does that? Yeah,
that'll be a ginnel, that, mate.
And it is there where you can really appreciate some of the architecture of the buildings in this part of the city. At the end of the street and across a main road is the famous St. Nikolai Memorial, which is a former church that was destroyed during the war and now only has its spire and some outer walls left standing. You can go up the spire for a great view of the city, or you can read about what happened to the church in a small memorial museum, and that is just what I did before heading further into the city centre and to the City Hall. Known as the Rat House, it is an impressively rebuilt building built to the same specifications as the original that was also damaged during the war. But now it's a great spot in the city surrounded by shops, bars, cafes and restaurants, as well as the beautiful man-made Bin and Ulster Lake, complete with boat rides, a huge fountain, and tree-lined boulevards. We first left the square in front of the City Hall to head to a couple of churches, St Peter's Church and St James's Church, before heading into the Europa Passage shopping centre for a bite to eat and a drink. Now rested and refuelled, we had originally planned to jump on the S-Bahn over to the St Pauli district, but with the weather as nice as it was for our visit, me and my wife decided to walk it, which is only around a 30 to 35 minute walk away. We headed straight to the historic and infamous Reeperbahn, which certainly has a unique feel to it and is somewhere that gives you a different insight into the city when compared to the city centre and the riverfront. It is home to theatres, shops and, well, lots and lots of adult entertainment venues, which reminded me of Bangor Street in the party resort of Patong on Phuket. It had the same juxtaposition of people with obvious struggles in life, sitting and laying around tourists who were walking to see the sights, and with a mix of police cars cruising along the road, mixed with tourist buses. I do like to visit these sorts of areas, as if you only stick to the tourist part of a destination, you can get an unrealistic view of the port you are visiting, whilst heading out into other parts can really be eye-opening. Arguably the main and often the only reason for many to head to Reeperbahn is due to it being intrinsically linked to the Beatles, and there is now a monument to the Fab Four, or Five, known as Beatlesplatz. From there it is just a short downhill stroll to the Fish Market district, which unsurprisingly is where the city's bustling fish market is found, although it was closed for our visit there, but the building and the square behind it is impressive and well worth visiting even on non-market days. The walk along the banks of the River Elbe is one that I would highly recommend, and that is just what I would do next, starting with a look at the U-343, a Soviet submarine which is now a museum attraction. A bit further along the bank is the entrance to the Elbe Tunnel. Which is not only a feat of engineering, but it is a functioning part of the transport infrastructure of the port. Best of all, it's free to use, so me and my wife headed to one of its historic lifts, lined up in one of the old car lanes from back when cars could use a lift, and then headed underground. Nowadays the tunnel is just for pedestrians and cyclists, with a central bike lane and two pavements in the tunnel itself. With the other side of the tunnel industrial, we simply walked to the centre of it, then crossed over to come back again. Next to the tunnel entrance is where the hop-on hop-off buses start from, so as you would expect this is an area full of tourists and there are plenty of tourist gift shops waiting for you there. After the shops, the boat ride, the water taxi stops and the bus stops, you arrive at the next Riverside attraction, and this time it is a chance to look at a couple of historic ships. First you get the Rickmers, which has a long history doing different jobs for multiple countries down the years, but perhaps fittingly for our trip, it is a Windjammer class of ship, launched in 1896. Next was the Cap San Diego, a cargo ship that was built for the Hamburg South Line. And it is now a museum ship, as is the Rickmers. There are plenty of other interesting boats on the river, including a Mississippi-style paddle steamer, a lighthouse boat, and we would see more and more of these different types of ship as we walked along the front to the Elbphilharmonie, which is a concert hall, but it also has a viewing platform on it about halfway up, and that offers great views of not only your cruise ship but of the river and the city of Hamburg. It is free to go up there, but you do need to get a ticket. But with a huge queue when we got there, we gave up on our plan to head up there for a great view and simply headed to the elevated walkway that goes straight through the warehouse district and back to the pickup point for your bus, about 10 minutes away. On a side note, the Miniature Wonderland model railway attraction is just behind the pick-up and drop-off point, so if you want to go there, book a ticket online and don't book an excursion through your ship. It costs a lot more. Back on board, we would head to the Royal Promenade and to the cafe for a quick bite to eat, as we were too late to go to the buffet when we got back. The grab-and-go place is included in your cruise fare, and there are free drinks on offer there as well, although there are plenty of pay extras, such as specialty coffees, as is the soft served ice cream, and so we would head for one of those for dessert. Hamburg is a great sail out, where you go past the city centre and then the vast commercial port, before heading up to the Elbe estuary and into the North Sea. So we took the opportunity to watch us set off and head out to sea. We had plans for that evening, so we would quickly get changed, grab tea up in the buffet again, and then head down to the internal promenade, where I watched the Bob Marley tribute act known as the Hot Sands, who also did plenty of other performances around the ship, playing different types of Caribbean-inspired music. From there, it was into the theatre once again, and this time it was to watch a rock and roll act known as the Boulevards, and I have to say they were excellent. Although there was a slight issue where the lead singer's guitar strap broke. They played a mix of 50s and 60s music, and whilst it's not my favourite type of music, it's stuff everybody knows, and they did a great job of performing it. I should also mention the cruise director, Cruising Susan, who was one of the better ones as she got across what she needed to and let you get off after the show without taking up too much of your time, as so many do, and I'm sure you've all experienced it. And with that came the halfway point of my adventure. And that's where I'll leave this video, as next time we have another sea day, followed by our visit to Rotterdam in the Netherlands. So if that sounds of interest to you, don't forget to subscribe to be notified when that launches next week. And all that remains to be said is thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this first part of my trip report for my Northern European mini cruise, and see you next time.